Jarvis can bring here. So I can't wait to see what Jarvis is going to bring and how Brian's going to handle it. I got to say, this is definitely a wild one. This is a wild one.
Yeah, this is the Legacy Humans deck ported over from the modern powerhouse. I can see this deck being pretty powerful against Miracles. I haven't played it myself, but the combination of Cavernous Souls and Aether Vial can be a pretty big nightmare for the deck that's so reliant on fighting on the stack.
Absolutely. And again, something like Miracles, where they realistically only have a couple ways to remove your creatures, a Meddling Mage here can be absolutely devastating here. And one of the interesting things that, you kind of brought up earlier with Surgical Extraction is, with the Terminus trigger on the stack, you can kind of surgical away. And it's the same kind of thing with Meddling Mage and an Aether Vial here. So I'm pretty excited to see how this deck lines up. But I got to tell you, Edgar, I don't think this deck looks great. I think it seems a little too cute. But I'm really interested to see how it plays out. But I can certainly see that it lines up pretty well against Miracles. So
yeah, I mean this deck has a lot of tools. Even outside of the Meddling Mage thing you mentioned, he can perform the same trick with a Kiteseal Freebooter as well. And
good point.
Just the combination of those two Hate Bears and Thalia and Imperial Recruiter to find it all, and just the use of Aether Vial to present his threats at the pace that he wants to, just let him play around the Wraths and the removal spells of the Miracles deck so well. And Champion of the Pairs can get so large, and if the champion requires the use of a Source of Plowshares, and that just paves the way for one of these Hate Bears, it can be game ending.
Right, and one of the interesting things here is, do you know why the Humans deck is playing Imperial Recruiter and not Recruiter of the Guard?
I believe it's because it finds Reflector Mage.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. So it's like kind of like this really interesting like dynamic that you might not really think about because Recruiter of the Guard is obviously much cheaper as a Magic card. When you want to go spend some money over some Imperial Recruiters. I know Imperial Recruiter did get reprinted. So
we're playing Legacy over here. I don't think this is a strong consideration.
Well, maybe not for everyone, but for me, it's just I'll go with a little bit of a cheaper cards. But yeah, fortunately for Jarvis, you do sometimes need to get Reflector Mage here. So besides,
a Recruiter of the Guard can also be cast off Horizon Canopy, so it is easier on the mana base too. But the deck has so many Utopias that I think the extra power is probably just worth it.
Yeah, and this is of course going to be, I think, certainly a tough matchup here. But if you're Jarvis, you have to potentially consider that Brian brought a deck like Grixis Control, to this tournament. And even if you beat Miracles, I gotta say it might be a really tough matchup to try and beat Grixis Control with this deck.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. And if you're thinking 2 steps ahead, then perhaps that's a strong consideration. But I think Jarvis, with his back against the wall, being down a match, he really needs to focus on presenting his deck that is best against the Miracles deck. And I'm not sure what his third deck is, but if that deck has a bad Miracles matchup, then his hand is basically forced. If that means losing to the Grixis Control deck following this, then so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, I think that Jarvis led off with, and there's a lot of sub games here. Right? Like, what do you think that your opponent is going to submit for their first deck? What do you think they're going to submit for their other 2 decks? Like, there's a lot of little interesting, things here that both players can do to try and play each other. Based on what they're going to play here. Do you think that Jarvis assumed that Humans might be really good against the 3 decks that Brian is going to submit, or do you think he just might have thought it was going to be good against 1 or 2 and good enough that he could steal a match or 2?
I mean, Brian has a really strong range. He's played a lot of decks in his time playing Legacy. He's played Stoneforge strategies. He's played Heart Control strategies. I've seen him play combo before, so it can be really tough from Jarvis's side to anticipate what Brian's going to do, but. Yeah, it's a huge leveling game because as far as Jarvis knows, maybe Brian just brings the best 3 decks in the format and he just decides that he wants to play those, and you could target it that way. But if if Brian comes from a different angle, then you're going to get blown out. So maybe this humans deck was him hedging his bets a little bit, and he felt like he was good against a couple of the top decks in the format and a couple of the lower decks, the oddballs that he thought Brian might bring, and then he could use this as a counter pick almost to target whatever he knows he's playing against after losing a match.
Absolutely. Kind of an interesting note. How do you feel this humans deck lines up against combo decks? One of the things that you just brought up is that Brian has in the past played combo decks. We've seen him play Sneak and Show. We've seen him play Ad Nauseam Tendrils. So these decks are certainly on the radar. They're certainly something that Brian can bring here. Do you think that humans has a good matchup against any of these combo decks?
Yeah, I think they do. And I think the best comparison to make is that in Modern, a lot of the combo decks have restructured how they build their deck in order to respect the humans deck. The first week the humans deck existed in Modern, it was destroying like Storm, for instance, because the Storm deck had only Grape Shot to take Meddling Mage off the table and to win the game. So they were just completely cold in game one. But recently, they've been putting different answers in their main deck in order to respect the humans deck. Legacy hasn't gotten to that point, and I think a lot of the combo decks in Legacy, they will fold in a similar manner in game one, and that could be really good for the humans deck. Basically, almost auto-winning a game means that the combo deck has to come back from behind and win 2 of the post-board games, which can be pretty tough for them.
All right, that's thanks for the insight, Edgar. That was actually really interesting to consider and think about. And now I'm kind of excited. Is this humans deck going to be able to take out Miracles? And then if it does, what is Brian going to bring to the table here? Because obviously we don't know for sure exactly what the 3 decks are. We are going to find out together, and I'm really excited to see how this goes. But we are going to get a match. Jarvis did get his cards, so this is going to be really exciting. We're going to have humans versus Miracles here. How important is it for Jarvis to win the die roll here?
The die roll is somewhat important, but I think what's going to be more important for Jarvis is the presence of Aether Vial and Cabin of Souls in his opening hand. Those are by far the 2 most powerful cards in the matchup. Just being able to completely nullify a big chunk of the Miracles deck is going to give him such a huge advantage in game one.
So that is going to be really exciting here. It looks like Brian once again, won the die roll here, and that's going to be a pretty good spot to start off on. Jarvis's hand looks great. Aether Vial, Palace Jailer, Noble Hierarch, Thalia's Attendant. These are all cards that I'm pretty excited to have, in this matchup, especially Palace Jailer, knowing that Brian has very few ways to attack. This Palace Jailer can get out of control pretty quickly here. So the question is, for Brian's side, without knowing what Jarvis is bringing, is this the kind of hand that you think you can keep in the dark?
It's tough because Brian has to know that Jarvis is selecting his deck that is best against Miracles. And as far as Miracles hands go, this is a hand that's a bit on the slower side. So does he think that Jarvis is going to try to outgrind him, perhaps like Grixis versus Miracles, or is Jarvis going to try to get under him? And it looks like BBD thought that there's a good chance that Jarvis would be trying to go along with him, so he decided to keep the hand, and he's going to get a little bit punished for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we're going to see Misty Rainforest pass. Jarvis is going to draw, well, not the best Rainbow land, still solidly a good one. Unclaimed Territory, that's going to go ahead and name humans, and this Aether Vial is going to come down here. Brian's going to respond with Brainstorm here, and he found pretty much exactly what he was looking for in Force of Will.
Yeah, that was a big check on this game. Without that Force of Will, he was going to be behind on mana. His counter spells in the future turns were going to be turned off, and it was going to be a much worse spot for him. But now Jarvis is forced to play on equal footing, forced to use this Horizon Canopy for mana rather than drawing a card, and it's going to be a lot tougher for him. We see Jarvis here extending 2 Noble Hierarchs, which is a little bit awkward in the presence of Terminus existing, but without the Aether Vial in play, Jarvis has much less luxury in developing his creatures, especially with this Thalia's Lieutenant in play, basically insisting that he has to develop multiple threats onto the battlefield.
Absolutely. So we are going to see Brian is not going to miracle a Terminus here. We are going to see some lands. get in here. Snapcaster Mage, Brainstorm at the ready, Swords of Plowshares at the ready. I think Brian feels like he's probably in a pretty good spot to just kind of sit around and take some turns off here. But we are going to see Ancient Ziggurat off the top for Jarvis. That has to be not very exciting here, but this Palace Jailer is going to feel great.
Yeah, this is a good one. Like you said earlier, it's going to be very difficult for Brian to become the king of this match, and Jarvis drawing multiple cards a turn is just going to help him play around the wrath effects and the various spot removal effects. And this is going to be a huge check for Brian. Him not having the force here means that he's going to have to very quickly develop a threat and somehow get it in, or risk just getting buried in card advantage.
Right, and what's really actually incredibly smart here from Jarvis is Jarvis did not attack with Noble Hierarch here. Now, the reason that he didn't is because, if example, Brian does end up having a Snapcaster Mage here and a Plow, it's going to be really easy for Brian to go ahead and take the Monarch. But wow, this Brainstorm is pretty solid. Back to basics here seems outright devastating.
Back to basics is huge, and also he hit the second Swords of Plowshares, which means, although I was saying it was incredibly unlikely, Brian's going to be able to steal the Monarch this turn. And as bad as being the Monarch is, oh wow, he didn't plow.
This is actually even better, a better series of events. Jarvis is forced to block with his Noble Hierarch. Palace Jailer is going to get exiled from the Swords of Plowshares, and this back to basics is going to close Jarvis out from casting anything, for the foreseeable future here. And this is a dangerous spot for Jarvis to be in here, and things are looking pretty grim.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably way better than what I was even thinking, because the humans deck has no basics because it's just forced to play with all these Utopia lands. And although Jarvis is going to be drawing so many cards, he's not going to be able to develop them. And eventually the Snapcaster Mage is going to get in and claim Brian the Monarch token.
Right, and we see here Jarvis is going to continually respect a Swords to Plowshares off the top here. Not going to attack, no reason to give up the Monarch for free. And I think, Jarvis really needs these Noble Hierarchs in play to be able to really get ahead. But, this back to basics is doing a lot of work here.
Yeah, Mother of Runes is a good draw there. This Mother of Runes is going to, if Brian is unable to answer it, it's going to permanently check the Snapcaster. Because as it stands, Jarvis is throwing a creature under the bus every turn in order to maintain the Monarch. But if this Mother of Runes sticks, he will no longer have to do that and perhaps gain some traction in this game.
Absolutely here. And now there's an interesting spot for Brian. I think he's going to wait to see what he draws here. And wow, he does flip a Terminus off the top here. And, this is an interesting spot, is do you want to cast Terminus here? And I don't think I agree with Brian. There's no real reason to make any movements here. The Snapcaster Mage is essentially an Abyss every turn. It is going to force Jarvis to make some game actions here at some point in time, but this Monarch going back to BBD here is just going to yield a lot of value.
Yep, and if as long as Brian maintains it, he's going to have a strong foothold in this game. Jarvis is going to be able to take it back this turn, but even both players drawing 2 cards a turn in this game is a huge benefit for the Miracles deck, just because Jarvis is choked on mana using that back to basics.
Wow, and this back to basics is something that we talked about is extraordinarily devastating here, for Jarvis here. And even though this Noble Hierarch is going to get back this Monarch this turn, it's just going to keep going back and forth until Brian finds an answer. But once Brian finds an answer for this Noble Hierarch, that's really going to close very quickly the amount of outs that Jarvis has.
Right, and all of this came back down to that turn 1 play, right? If Jarvis had an Aether Vial in play on turn 1, this back to basics would be significantly less devastating, and I don't think Jarvis would have been in this spot. But Brian hitting the force on that Brainstorm was very key.
Right, and it looks like we're just playing a back and forth game until Jarvis can find. Jarvis is really hoping for an Aether Vial here. Like really, really badly wants to draw an Aether Vial off the top here, but Brian is getting further and further ahead every turn.
I'm interested to think if Brian's going to just Terminus here, just so that he can maintain the Monarch for basically the rest of the game. But he probably feels as though if both players are drawing 2 each turn, that just benefits him, and he doesn't really need to.
Yeah, we're going to see here, Brainstorm is going to be drawn off the Monarch here. So Brian is going to go ahead and get to put back, looks like he got to put back a Terminus here. And now, with Terminus on top and Brainstorm and accumulated knowledge in hand, Brian has the ability to draw Terminus at instant speed during Jarvis's turn and kind of close him off from really doing anything. And it looks like that is going to happen during the upkeep here.
Right. Because this also cuts Jarvis off of colored mana with... Ooh, this is a heads-up play by Jarvis. He's wasting the Flood Strand, anticipating the Terminus being on top of the library, just getting value out of that wasteland while he can. And Brian obviously not sacking so that he can keep the Terminus.
Right. So we're going to see Terminus is going to be miracled off the top. It is going to take the Snapcaster Mage and Noble Hierarch and put them to sleep on the bottom of the deck here. And another Wasteland off the top here is not going to do it. Jarvis is going to go ahead and concede here, and we are going to be going to game 2 here. Now, let's take a look at the sideboards here, and I like what Brian is reaching for. Disenchant, Engineer, Explosives both seem pretty good here. Monastery Mentor, I'm pretty okay with. You know, it doesn't look like, based on what we've seen, you know, we have to decide. Brian has to decide, does he think that his opponent's playing Mantis Riders or not? And if he's not, then Monastery Mentor is going to be pretty good at doing a lot of blocking and going wide here.
Yeah, I think Mantis Rider is fairly uncommon because of the power of the recruiters and the fact that the humans deck is so priced into playing the tribal lands. It's pretty unlikely that they have any removal spells. So a turn 3 Monastery Mentor can go uncontested in this matchup. Jarvis gets to bring in some good tools, some extra Palace Scalers, some Reclamation Stages for the back to basics. And notably, he gets to cut a lot of his cards that are bad against the Miracle strategy. I think that if I was in his spot, I would be going down on Wastelands like he is now, and perhaps some copies of Thalia's Lieutenant, because the Thalia's Lieutenant kind of prices him into going wide, which is something that he might not necessarily want to do.
Right. So I do really agree with that. We do see Reclamation Sage is going to come in, Thalia's Lieutenant is going to come out, and a little Joe Lissette special here. Venser Shaper Savant is going to be a pretty interesting card here. It was pretty solid. Really nice against like a Terminus, or maybe end step you just get rid of a back to basics and unlock your lands. So I think Venser here is a pretty solid card. Another Imperial Recruiter is going to give Jarvis an even better ability to be able to keep up with the Ponders and Brainstorms from Brian's side.
Right, and really find his haymakers, whichever they may be. Finding his one copy of Gaddock Teague, for instance, can be really powerful against Terminus and Supreme Verdict.
Right, absolutely. It's something like Meddling Mage on Swords to Plowshares into Gaddock Teague might just wrap things up. Right, yeah. It might be that easy for Jarvis to win a game like that, but it looks like we are going to see, I believe Brian Mulligan, and this hand is pretty solid. Force of Will in hand means he's not going to lose to a turn 1 Aether Vial here. Plow means he has all the tools that he needs to be able to go after anything here. Back to basics off the top, not really exciting at the moment, but it looks like that was top from Brian off of his scry here. And this is kind of an interesting point here. We talk a lot about bolting the bird here. Is this something that you're interested in doing, Edgar?
I would be interested in a normal hand, but unfortunately for Brian, he only has 1 land, and he really needs access to this Ponder to continue to develop his mana base. If he was to fetch a Tundra, he risks losing the game outright to a Wasteland. So I think I like waiting and just pondering, trying to develop your mana base, and then saving the Swords to Plowshares for one of the hate bears that Jarvis is likely to have.
It's certainly a good point here. We are going to see this Ponder is going to keep Tundra. It's going to keep double accumulated knowledge here. Is Brian having flashbacks to match number 2 when he got all of them surgical?
I mean, he ended up winning that game, so maybe he wants it to happen again.
Maybe he's ready. Maybe accumulated knowledge is so bad that inherently you want to trick your opponent to surgically it so you can actually have a better deck.
Maybe you can draw more good cards.
If people are playing that.
Right.
So we already see Champion Mother of Runes come down. Noble Hierarch is going to go ahead and attack for 1 here, and no Terminus anywhere in sight has got to make this this Mother of Runes a little scary.
Yeah, the fact that Brian left on basic island means that he can't get Terminus on this turn, and this Mother of Runes is going to force Brian to have a Source of Plowshares or have those be invalidated for the rest of the game. Unfortunately for Jarvis, this Engineered Explosives is going to be a bit of a blowout, but Jarvis does have some gas in hand to rebuild after this.
Oh, this is actually really interesting here. Brian didn't play his Tundra, and this might be, what you were hearkening back to before, is if that Tundra gets wastelanded, this Engineer Explosives is not going to do a lot of work here. So I do think that, this is kind of exciting here. Now, this is kind of dangerous too. If Jarvis has something like Reclamation Sage, that could be pretty devastating here.
Yeah, Brian does have the Forcible in his hand, and Jarvis doesn't have a Cavern of Souls, which is fortunate for Brian. But if Jarvis did have a Cavern of Souls off the top, or was sandbagging it, for instance, then it would be quite the blow to get rid of this Engineered Explosives. I think Jarvis is considering venturing this Explosives and hoping that works out, but that's unfortunately not going to work out for him, I think.
Right, and if this were to work, for example, BBD skips a beat, doesn't have the Force of Will here, Caracas plus Venser could essentially lock Brian out of the game for the foreseeable future here.
Right, and even outside of the lock, just Brian would end up taking 4 damage on this turn and then have to spend another turn deploying the Engineer Explosives and take at least 6 more damage on the turn after that, which would have been a lot with gas still in hand for Jarvis. Jarvis here is now in a spot where he has to develop around what Brian could have, and I like this play of Sanctum Prelate because with Brian quote-unquote missing land drops, he doesn't know for sure that he doesn't have lands in hand since the Tundra could have been sandbagged, but the deck usually only plays 1 Tundra, so if Brian had a different land in his hand, he might have played it anyways. So Jarvis decided to play the Sanctum Prelate on 1 to prevent Brian from cantripping into more lands after the fact.
Right, and we are going to see here, Accumulated Knowledge is going to draw Monastery Mentor, passing back to Jarvis. Jarvis is going to go ahead, play a Thalia, kind of lock up what Brian is doing, play a Mother of Runes to protect his creatures, and he's going to attack Brian down to 12 here, and this Thalia is taxing between this and the Prelate. It's going to tax him out completely here. And Gaddock Teague off the top here with Caracas in play and a Mother of Runes. Oh, I think this might be it for Brian.
And a Prelate on 1 turning off Plow means that the outs for Brian are few and far between. He can't Terminus, he can't Plow into Terminus. He's basically relying on, I believe, just Supreme Verdict. Oh, no, that doesn't even work either. Does he even have outs? I'm not even sure.
I'm not sure. Maybe if he draws a land here, plays Monastery Mentor, and then can untap into, I don't know, accumulated, like back to basics into Accumulated Knowledge. And
just create enough blockers.
Jarvis making a bad attack, but I don't think that's going to happen, especially with all the 1-mana cantrips being shut off here. We are going to see Jarvis go ahead and take it. So that is going to end things for Brian in this game, and we're going to go to a game 3 where Brian's going to be on the play again. So this might be, exactly really where he wants to be able to set up the first few turns without being on the back foot.
Right, and we really saw the Hate Bears in full force that game. Jarvis didn't have to tutor any of them, but he drew 2 of his one of Hate Bears that he could tutor for, and you can see how huge of an impact they ended up having on the game.
Absolutely, just kind of really closed Brian out in short order, and it wasn't really a lot of setup either, right? It was just 2 creatures kind of just cold and BBD there.
Twitch chat has reminded us that Council's Judgment was an out. That is one that we forgot.
Thank you, Twitch chat. It's so often that Twitch chat is wrong that I'm just not used to them telling us something that's correct.
How dare you?
So we are going to see here. Looks like both players are going to mulligan here. Looks like Brian's going all the way down to 5. Jarvis on 6. It looks like Jarvis is going to go ahead and keep a 6 here of Champion of the Parish, Gaddock Teague, and Double Meddling Mage. It's going to be really fantastic here for him. And Brian, on this 5 is going to have to really be careful with how he maneuvers.
So, and Jarvis had Cavern of Souls as well, and with Brian on 5 cards. Although it's likely that Brian boarded out much of his counter magic, it's going to be difficult for Brian to claw back in with only one-for-one removal spells. This Gaddock is going to be powerful, but you can see that with the Cavern of Souls on human on turn 1, Jarvis has decided that he would prefer to play a Meddling Mage on turn 2. And then the Gaddock following that. So perhaps an early Terminus can stifle Jarvis's aggression before he can develop that Teague into play.
Absolutely, here. We are going to see this, we're very likely to see a Meddling Mage come down here. What are you looking to name? I think it's really close here.
I think you want to name Swords to Plowshares, and the reason for that is because we have the Teague in hand already, and that one's going to check Terminus, and that's the other high impact card to name. You could name something like Engineered Explosives if you were worried about that being powerful on this board state, but I think you just want to name the card that he's more likely to have. You see Jarvis naming Terminus, which is pretty interesting, and I think he's going to get rewarded for that, because if I'm not mistaken, Brian has a Terminus on top of his library. I wouldn't have expected this with the Teague in hand, but perhaps Jarvis is thinking something that I'm not.
Yeah, we're going to see Swords to Plowshares here on the end step. It's going to go ahead and take out this Meddling Mage here. Terminus off the top. You got to assume that that's not really going anywhere. Don't really want to Terminus away a champion of the parish. Accumulated knowledge from Brian is going to go ahead and draw him a card here. It looks like it's going to be Back to Basics, and that's going to be pretty strong here. So we are going to see Brainstorm Terminus, Back to Basics in Brian's hand. All cards that I'm sure he's pretty happy to have here. And we're going to swing on back to Jarvis' side. Imperial Recruiter off the top is pretty nice here.
Yeah, without a huge clock in play, that Back to Basics will be devastating. So Brian's definitely hoping that Jarvis doesn't develop too much on this turn. And with a Brainstorm Terminus in hand, even if he does develop too much, Brian could instead play Brainstorm End Stub into Terminus on his turn. Unfortunately for Brian, this Teague is basically the card that stymies that two-pronged attack that he has, where it can develop both more pressure for the Back to Basics, but also invalidate the Terminus.
Yeah, absolutely here. This Brainstorm is not going to yield a Swords to Plowshares or a Snapcaster Mage, either of which Brian is likely looking for in order to be able to get rid of this Teague here. So I think we're pretty likely to maybe see this Back to Basics come down next turn to try and shut off Jarvis from making any more plays, building up his field anymore, while Brian is going to be searching for an answer.
Yeah, Jarvis is going to play Champion of the Parish here and attack Brian down to 14. But luckily for Brian, Jarvis only has 6 power in play as opposed to 7, so Brian has the full 3 turns in order to find an answer to this board state. And since he has that Terminus tucked down 2 cards, if this Ponder yields a Swords to Plowshares underneath it, he's going to be in good shape.
Unfortunately, we are going to see Force of Will, Ponder, and Terminus. So now the real question begins is Brian going to go ahead and shuffle and rebuy here? And it looks like he is, and he's going to find Council's Judgment here. Pretty stellar card to be able to rip out this Gaddock Teague. So we are going to see now what Brian is going to do, and it looks like he is going to use Council's Judgment here to get rid of this Teague.
Yeah, this Tundra is really awkward. If it was a fetch land instead, Brian could have played Back to Basics this turn, prevented any further development, and then Council's Judgment into Terminus after that. Or I suppose the Terminus is gone, so he wouldn't have been able to do that anyways. But the Tundra not letting him deploy a Back to Basics is still an unfortunate consequence of it having it in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we are going to see Meddling Mage come down, hit the battlefield once again here. You got to imagine it's probably got to be Terminus again at this point, because Terminus is the only real devastating card from Brian here at this point.
Yeah, almost certainly. And the fact that Brian played the Council's Judgment to deal with the Teague means that he probably doesn't have a Swords of Plowshares unless he was just trying to be more mana efficient. But regardless, you have to just name Terminus here. It's a 4 of, or at least a 3 of in the deck, and you're just trying to get him dead as quickly as you can, and even an Engineered Explosives might leave Brian with too little life to win anyways. So
yeah, and this is pretty bad here. Disenchant off the top, Jace the Mind Sculptor Back to Basics. I don't think this is going to be. I don't think this is going to be good enough. I don't know if there's going to be anything that is going to get Brian out of this. Even if he finds land, sorts to plowshares, I just don't think that's going to be enough here. And it looks like that is going to be enough. Jarvis is going to take this match with humans over Miracles 2-1 here, and now we're going to get to see another deck out of Brian here. And this is kind of the interesting part we talked about. If Brian has a combo deck, is he going to be able to submit it? And I think the answer is no.
No, you almost certainly can't. And the Hate Bears were annoying for the Miracles deck, and they would be even more annoying for the combo deck. So Brian's definitely, well, not hoping, but if Brian better have a nice fair strategy to deal with these creatures, or else he's going to be playing pretty badly from behind.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to see Brian's going to have to submit a new deck. And this is one of the scary parts is, do you think Brian submitted Grixis Control or not? And that's going to be the really tough part for Jarvis here. And I think Jarvis just kind of has to hope and pray. And I'm really excited to see what Brian's going to bring to us.
Yeah, I mean, the humans was the counter pick like we talked about, right? And maybe Jarvis was just hoping to get one win out of it, and maybe cheese the entire series. But Brian's been known to play a lot of Grixis Control recently. He played it at the Pro Tour. He played it at Grand Prix Richmond. And I'm under the impression that the matchup's pretty good for the Grixis Control deck. And if Jarvis sees some K commands on the other side, I'm sure he's not going to be that happy.